Evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 on Wednesday, the 1st of May. My name is Brian Liddy, and this evening, before I start, I should really apologise for our tardy start this evening. Things have just been going against us, really, but here we are now. And this evening, I'm joined by Richard Thomson, SNP MP for Gordon. Richard, thank you. You're the SNP spokesperson for Business and Trade, and you have been since 2022. Thank you for taking some time out and joining us this evening.
No, great pleasure as always, Brian. Thank you.
No, thank you. So we'll start as usual with the Ukraine update, and today is day 798. Russian strikes on Kharkiv killed at least one person and wounded 9 on Tuesday, the regional governor said. Russian bombardment of Kharkiv, which lies near the Russian border and is Ukraine's second largest city, has intensified in recent weeks. Ukraine's railway company said the 24-year-old victim was one of its employees. The International Rescue Committee, the IRC, on Tuesday described a worsening situation in Kharkiv, southeast Ukraine, with an increasingly anxious population subjected to regular air raids. It said the city now regularly suffers severe power outages, interruptions in water and heating supply, and a complete halt of trams for public transportation. A 98-year-old woman in Ukraine has escaped Russian-occupied territory by walking almost 10 kilometres, that's 6 miles, alone, wearing a pair of slippers and supported by a cane. Lydia Stepanivna Nomokovska became separated from her family and continued alone after they decided to leave the frontline town of Okertin. Russian-occupied Crimea has come under Ukrainian attack. The the Moscow-installed authorities said, from what they described as US-supplied ATACMS missiles. Sergei Askanov, the Russian-backed head of Crimea, posted on Telegram a photo showing what he said were undetonated submunitions of ATACMS missiles that had been shot down. The photo and the Russian version of events could not be verified. Volodymyr Zelensky said Ukraine needed a significant acceleration in deliveries of weaponry. The US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said he was encouraging countries with Patriot missile systems to donate them to Ukraine, which has appealed for more of the air defense systems. Various European Union countries possess the systems, including Spain, Greece, Germany, the Netherlands, Poland, and Sweden. Zelensky has previously told NATO members that his country needs a minimum of 7 additional Patriot or other high-end air defense systems. Poland will not protect draft dodgers who are on its soil avoiding Ukrainian military service, a Polish Deputy Foreign Minister Andrzej Sieniat has told state television. Norway is to accelerate its military and civilian aid for Ukraine for this year by 7 billion kroner to a total of 22 billion kroner. Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Store said it would be brought forward from 75 billion kroner pledged to Ukraine, covering 2023 to 2027. Of the 7 billion kroner brought forward, 6 billion kroner would go to military aid, primarily desperately needed anti-air defence and ammunition. Shipping insurers who are within the reach of the UK and G7 are breaching the oil price gap imposed by Russia by the G7, a UK parliamentary hearing was told on Tuesday. A group of Western insurance firms, the international group of P&I clubs, complained to the same hearing that the oil price cap is being bypassed by Russia using its own fleet or switching to shipping companies that were outside the West's influence. On Tuesday, Kyiv authorities began taking down a Soviet-era monument celebrating friendship with Russia. The series of stone sculptures will be transferred to a Kyiv museum. Since the invasion began in 2022, Kyiv authorities had already taken down 2 bronze statues depicting a Ukrainian and a Russian worker at the same site. Richard, I wonder if there's anything that you'd like to highlight from today's Ukraine update. I was particularly taken aback by that poor woman that walked kilometres in her slippers, but is there anything else that you think is more worthy?
Not especially. It's the human stories that always bring out the tragedy in what's going on in Ukraine. I feel, but I think that I think the main thing that's the issue in Ukraine at the moment, as sadly the last time I was on, and the time before that, and the time before that, is the lack of ammunition. While there's good news in terms of the additional support that's coming from the US, at least from my perspective, it's clear that a lot more yet is still going to be needed, whether that's to stem the Russian ground forces or simply to provide a level of protection in terms of the air bombardments that are still sadly underway.
Thank you, Richard. It's true. It's just incredible that we're at day 798 now, and it's ongoing. The situation in Israel, at least 34,568 Palestinians have been killed and 77,765 wounded in Gaza since the 7th of October, according to the Gaza Ministry of Health. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has met leaders in Israel and also the families of some of those held hostage in Gaza. He told the families to keep the faith and said after meeting President Isaac Herzog, "Even in these very difficult times, we are determined to get a ceasefire that brings the hostages home, and to get it now. And the only reason that wouldn't be achieved is because of Hamas." Hamas has asked Egyptian and Qatari mediators to provide clarity on the terms of the latest ceasefire proposal being discussed as part of negotiations with Israel, an Egyptian official told Associated Press on Wednesday. The official said Hamas wanted clear terms of the unconditional return of displaced people to the north of Gaza and to ensure that the second stage of the deal will include discussing the gradual and complete withdrawal of all Israeli troops from the entire Gaza Strip. Jordan said some Israeli settlers attacked two of its aid convoys that were on the way to Gaza on Wednesday. It said the attack resulted in the dumping of some of their cargo, which included food, flour, and other necessities, in the streets. Onenu, an Israeli legal aid agency, reported that 4 men who had blocked aid trucks going to Gaza as they were passing near the West Bank settlement of Mal Adumim were arrested by Israeli police. King Abdullah II of Jordan has announced that he has departed for Italy and then the US for a working visit that comes within the framework of Jordan's efforts to reach an immediate and lasting ceasefire in Gaza and stop the humanitarian catastrophe in the Strip. There has been violence as rival protest groups clash in Los Angeles, and police arrested dozens of protesters at Columbia University in New York. You can follow the latest coverage of that online. Richard, I think I saw you in the chamber today at PMQs, and I think, am I right in saying that Stephen Flynn's questions to the Prime Minister were about British troops going to Gaza or Israel? Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, there's been rumours speculation building for some time about the official involvement of UK forces in Gaza. Now we can suspect what might have gone on in certain respects since the 7th of October. They've openly spoken of the RAF being involved in providing air defence to Israel from the bombardment that came from Iran. So there's been that the British government was certainly very, very open about that. But in terms of troops on the ground, potentially to aid with the situation in Gaza in terms of humanitarian aid distribution and things like that, that would be a significant step, and it's one that Stephen put the Prime Minister on the spot over. I think quite rightly, this Prime Minister's questions, and while Keir Starmer and Sunak were trading blows over the performative nonsense about the English local elections that are going ahead tomorrow. Yet again, it was the SNP that was there speaking up for what I think are the values of the people of Scotland and values of democracy, demanding that if there were to be any involvement of UK forces in any role in Gaza that Parliament would be told first and given a vote on it. And Rishi Sunak, as is his wont, tried to slither away from that. But I think there was a very, very clear winner emerged from Prime Minister's questions today, not in terms of the political points that anyone was trying to score, but in terms of the points in principle made. And it sure as hell wasn't Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak. Once again, it was the SNP and Stephen Flynn that was doing the job that the people of Scotland would expect us to do.
No, the Prime Minister didn't really answer the question, as far as I can remember. And Stephen Flynn said that if there is going to be British troops on the ground there, that it should be put to a vote or it should be. What do your colleagues, not just SNP colleagues, but other MPs say? Do you think there is going to be an opportunity if there is going to be troops on the ground there?
I suspect not, but the marker has been put down now, and that was what was leading the agenda for large parts of today after that. So I think we've certainly put down a marker that, as far as the SNP is concerned, no forces should be involved without Parliament having a debate and a vote on it. And yet again, the Labour Party, when it comes to this issue, are nowhere to be seen. And I think, let's boil this down to some of the raw domestic politics. You've got a choice of potentially at the election, Labour MPs who sit in their hands and do nothing to upset their leadership, or you can have people there in the SNP who stand up for the values that people of Scotland would expect us to. And that's yet another example today of us doing exactly that.
Thank you, Richard. So the next item is the Scottish Government defeated the Labour Party's vote of no confidence today, with the SNP and the Greens voting against the motion and Labour and Conservative, Lib Dems and Ash Regan of the Alba Party all for the motion, which could have resulted in a Scottish election. The vote was called after the outgoing First Minister, Humza Yousaf, ended the Butte House Agreement, and unionist parties spotted an opportunity to exploit division between the SNP and the Greens. The vote was 58 for the motion and 70 against. Richard, again, I think I'll ask you more or less the same question regardless of what the situation is. I was just wondering, was there any talk about this in Westminster today? Did it register at all? And if so, what are people saying about today's vote of no confidence?
Well, it registered in Westminster to the extent that the Scottish Questions was on today. I'm not sure how much Scottish Questions registered in Scotland, to be perfectly blunt. But we had that prize Gype, Alistair Jack, trying to make fun of the political situation in Scotland, and I think he certainly needs a new scriptwriter. I was tempted to tell him not to give up the day job, but my Christ, he really should give up the day job for everybody's sake. But no, it didn't really register much at Westminster, other than let's all laugh at the SNP, as they would have it, because that's about the extent of their intellectual capacity for issues in Scotland. But I was on College Green speaking to the BBC for the Politics Scotland section this afternoon, and naturally it came up there. But my point was there was a lot of performative nonsense and theatrical game playing about a Labour motion that was just going to fall flat in its face. I haven't had a chance because I've been busy doing other things this afternoon to catch up with the debate. But it just showed that for all the huffing and puffing of the last few days, the political change of the First Minister announcing his intention to step down has taken the wind out of this, and we're just back to the politicking that was there before. I mean, I think the very, very last thing, to be quite blunt about it, that the Labour Party or the Tory Party or even the Lib Dems wanted was an election, despite what they say. Labour might have thought they were going to advance, but they're not, certainly no one ready for government. They have no policies. This is the last thing that they want. The Tories would have been cut in half at any vote, at least. The Liberal Democrats remain a party in single figures without a single figure who can make them relevant. And once again, you saw that unionist pan-unionist alliance playing to the gallery rather than concentrating on what they always piously lecture us about as being the priorities of the people of Scotland. Interestingly, I'm just catching up with the news. I believe that the single Alaba MSP, who a few days ago we were being invited to believe was the most powerful MSP in Scotland, actually voted with the Unionists to bring down a pro-independence government. And I think I'll just leave that there for your viewers to contemplate and ruminate over about what a ridiculous and stupid and self-destructive act that really was.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Ash Reagan actually, so that's fine. So we've covered that. The other striking point, if you're still catching up, was how incredibly rude Douglas Ross, the leader of the Conservative Party, was. He was asked to apologise, I think, 3 times by Alison Johnson, and it took. More or less, he didn't apologise until the 4th attempt to get him to do so. Apologised to John Swinney. But I thought one of the more interesting contributions, and it wasn't a very long debate if anybody's thinking about catching up on it, I thought it was interesting that Patrick Harvey's main word seemed to be regret. He said that many times in his contribution. And there was a lot of SNP applause, quite warm applause, after Patrick Harvey gave a warm address to talk about Humza Yousaf's decision to step down. So do you think this, just the way the two parties were kind of seemed to be in the same mood almost, is that a good sign that the ice is going to thaw between the SNP and the Scottish Greens? Will they let bygones be bygones?
Well, I honestly don't know the answer to that. I'm not in the Holyrood chamber, so I don't have a way to assess the dynamics as acutely as I might what goes on at Westminster. But look, that's good to hear. There's been a huge amount of politics this week. There's the politics outside the chamber in terms of the ending of the Butte House Agreement and what that means, but there's still the politics within the chamber to navigate. And the whole rationale for the Butte House Agreement was, apart from the policies where there was an overlap, my own view is that the SNP certainly didn't need the Greens as a bolt-on accessory to ensure progress in areas of progressive politics or in environmental politics, but there was a significant area of overlap in policy. So in terms of coming together to deliver on that was a potentially good and useful thing to do. But the whole purpose of it was really to provide a bit of stability in the chamber, because Labour were clearly not willing to work with the SNP. The Tories certainly aren't. Douglas Ross showed that admirably today. The Lib Dems are fighting with the Tories and Labour to see how to be the most hostile unionist party towards the SNP. So, it's clear that unless any of those 3 parties are willing to kind of set cudgels down to a certain extent and cooperate in areas of policy or budgets, then clearly it's going to require some element of continued cooperation between the SNP and the Greens as the only parties that seem to be willing to work together in any positive way to get past the magic number of 65 members in a 129-member chamber. So, yeah, that sounds like reasonably positive mood music. But I think my overwhelming sense of everything from this week is the various people overplaying their hands at various points, whether it was the Greens going to their membership in terms of deciding whether or not they wanted to stay, in terms of the manner in which Humza Yousaf, as he's conceded himself effectively, chose to terminate the manner in which he terminated the agreement, Ash Reagan being touted by as the most powerful MSP in Scotland. If that really was the case, it might have been nice to hear a little bit more from her rather than from her party leader, let me say that. But also, the Lib Dems, Labour and the Conservatives have all overplayed their hands as well. And I think what we've seen over the last week has been perhaps will be seen, I think, as a triumph of short-term tactics over long-term strategy. And certainly I'm very optimistic now about the path that a minority SNP government can begin to chart in cooperation with those who are willing to work with us.
It has been an interesting couple of days, which, by the way, nobody abstained in the vote. Everybody voted either for or against. I thought it was interesting that Willie Rennie spoke for the Lib Dems. His main reason for voting for the the vote of no confidence, I'm against the government, seemed to be that he just wanted the SNP to stop working towards independence, which I thought was a bit of a lame excuse. But
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's a whole unionist trope there that Scotland is somehow divided. It's the SNP that's divided it, and they've divided it because we've dared to ask people about independence and because we haven't changed our mind since 2014. Therefore, the only way to undivide Scotland or unite Scotland is for the SNP to shut up about independence and go away forever. And, also presumably by extension, the near 50% of Scots who want independence should just shut up and never think about it ever again. That doesn't really seem to be a recipe for intellectual honesty or for any kind of unity or for moving forward. And, as I often like to say, if you want to claim the moral high ground about division in politics, don't behave in such a divisive way yourselves. So, we all have to share this country. We have to get over the fact that some of us have different opinions on the Constitution. But saying that the only way to you heal this alleged division in Scottish society is for one side to shut up and go away forever. I'm sorry, Willie, I'm not going anywhere.
Okay, thanks, Richard. I'm going to be cheeky and steal another wee minute from this. We don't have a lot of time, but another thing that I think's been interesting the past few days. So there were two votes of no confidence that Humza Yousaf, the First Minister, and the SNP government were facing before Humza Yousaf declared that he was going to step down. Once he said that he was stepping down, then the vote of no confidence against him was withdrawn. But up until then, both the Greens and Ash Regan of Alba said they were going to vote with the Unionists against the SNP. And so now it seems that, would you agree that the Greens have almost dodged a bullet, and because now they've swung fully behind the SNP government, but Ash Regan seems to have gone the other way?
Well, the Greens can speak for themselves. I'm not sure they've swung behind the SNP government, or should they, as an independent party, frankly. There's the thing about the Butte House Agreement was once you went into it, then there was always going to be a cost of coming out of it in terms of securing support. And that now has to be done on an issue-by-issue basis. And, somebody who ran a minority administration in Aberdeenshire Council for a couple of years, it can be quite exhausting doing that. But I'm sure that everybody is up for the challenge, particularly in the new circumstances. But I'm looking down through a Twitter timeline of a prominent Alaba unelected politician who desperately wants to be elected, or general secretary, who is now in a fight with former presiding officer Tricia Marwick, claiming that the result of the vote was meaningless. So clearly somebody's trying to backtrack from what their only MSP, who, let's not forget, was elected for the SNP, actually did with that vote as and using her most powerful status to side with unionists to try and bring down or to express a preference to bring down an SNP government in support of independence. So I think that's a catastrophic miscalculation. Their vote was meaningless in the end, but everybody will see the intent behind it. And I think there's no hiding place for them in this. There really isn't.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So thank you, Richard. With the announcement that Scotland's onshore GDP contracted by 0.3% in February 2024, according to statistics announced by the chief statistician. This follows unrevised growth of 0.6% in January 2024. Questions have been raised about whether Scotland is getting any benefit from its contribution to the UK economy. In the 3 months to February, GDP is estimated to have grown by 0.4% compared to the previous 3-month period. This indicates an increase in growth relative to the contraction of 0.5%. That's revised from minus 0.6%. I think I've read that correctly, in 2023 quarter 4, which is from October to December. Scotland's annual tax contributions to the UK have increased by £14.2 billion over the last decade, with income tax, capital gains tax and taxes on productions, such as environmental levies, driving this increased contribution. New analysis shows that the Scottish public sector generated an annual revenue of £73.3 billion during the last financial year, a 24% increase versus a decade ago, equating to an increased contribution of £14.2 billion to the UK economy. As a result, Scotland now accounts for 8% of total UK contributions, far more than the 3.5% contributed by Wales and the 2.1% contributed by Northern Ireland, although the populations in those countries are significantly lower. Both income tax at plus 71% and capital gains tax at plus 70% have seen the largest increase of all the taxes on income and wealth over the last decade, with corporation tax, excluding North Sea oil, also up 17%. In fact, of all taxes on income and wealth, just public corporation contributions have seen a decline, that's down 30%. Taxes on productions have also climbed by 35%, with taxes on environmental levies driving this increase up to 368% in the last decade. Taxes on land and building transactions have increased by 197%, with taxes from EU emissions trading scheme auction receipts seeing the third largest increase at 190%. Scotland is often accused of not being able to pay its way. However, these figures are leading to questions about whether Scotland receives value for money in its contribution to the UK economy. Richard, I'll just ask you just that. Do you think Scotland does get good value for money for its contributions to the UK economy?
No, I mean, that's a very encouraging set of figures that you've been able to share there. But I think that, generally speaking, Scotland seems to be the only one country in the world where running a deficit is seen as a bad thing. I mean, countries run deficits all the time. Ireland's running a pretty hefty surplus at the moment because of some circumstances. The Norwegians obviously have an oil fund and can run surpluses quite a bit as well. But governments running a deficit is good because it means they have to issue debt, and that's good for pension funds and people who are looking for secure long-term investments as well. So, as I say, good set of numbers there. Scotland, as I say, is just like it's the only country in the world that doesn't seem to be able to run a deposit return scheme for plastic bottles, if you believe the UK government. And we're also the only country that can't run a deficit, apparently, where that's a bad thing. But in terms of the value for money that we get, no, bluntly, I don't think that, because we spend an awful lot of the taxes that we pay go to cover the cost of government in London. House of Commons, House of Lords, the jobs of the civil service that's based in London. An awful lot of that's often called unidentifiable expenditure. And whenever you hear the Tories talking about union dividends, or Labour doing the same when they're in office, what they're talking about is identified expenditure, which Scotland gets more of than the rest of the UK on average, but there's very, very significant variations across the UK and also within England. For example, the southeast of England has one of the lowest levels of identifiable expenditure on public services, but the northeast of England has one of the highest. So there's huge variations there. None of that tells you much about the tax take, unlike the figures that you've given us. But so if Scotland were independent, we would have the benefit of that spend taking place in Scotland on the cost of government, on the civil service. That would mean more people employed here, more people spending money. You would instantly get a boost to your GVA, your gross value added from that. There's the other benefits that would come from being a proper sovereign state. You would have a full-scale national broadcaster spending that money in Scotland. There's over 300 it's only just over 40%, I think, at the last count of licence fees that are paid in Scotland for the BBC ever gets spent at BBC Scotland. The rest of it goes to the network, but most of that spend takes place outside Scotland. But the non-identifiable expenditure or unidentified expenditure doesn't mean that you can't find it. It's just that it's expenditure that's assumed to be for the benefit of the entire UK. So that includes things like the money that gets spent at Porton Down, the chemical research facility there, at Aldermaston, where they manufacture nuclear weapons. There's a whole range of other things that come under that. Defence is a very, very big chunk of it, as you might expect. Also, there's expenditure that gets carried out on our behalf that I don't think any but that a majority of people in Scotland would want to see, like, for example, the whole Trident nuclear missile programme. So, I've got absolutely no doubt if Scotland were independent, would not only be reaping the benefits of the kind of vitality in the economy that your initial figures described, but what you'd also have is you'd be spending the money that has to go in the cost of government within Scotland, but delivering a direct economic benefit here. And because you're also in charge of all your policy as well as your resources, you won't be frittering it away on things like Trident, and you'd be able to make a more productive spend to get the better social economic outcomes that are in line with the values of the people in Scotland, because we'll always get the governments that we vote for, and we're not trying to keep up the pretense of being a first world power, because we'd be a small social democratic in the European mainstream country, in NATO and in the European Union, with a reach that is commensurate with our aspirations and ability to pay for it.
Thank you, Richard. And as I'm certainly not an economist, I'm just going to move on to the next item, but thank you for that. An MP has warned that taxpayers could continue to pay hundreds of millions of pounds for the Tories' cruel and costly Rwanda policy under a Labour government. The comments by Alison Thewlis MP follow a report that senior Labour figures have said the party may retain the Rwanda scheme, the flagship Tory policy that deports some of the most vulnerable people in the world to a country deemed unsafe and where their rights could once again be put at risk. National Audit Office figures have revealed the scheme will cost £541 million for the first 300 migrants sent to Rwanda if they stay there, with the UK already having sent £240 million to Rwanda. A senior Home Office official said that in addition to the money already sent, additional payments would be made to the government of Rwanda each year. Challenging Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer to scrap the scheme, the SNP's Home Affairs spokesperson Alison Thewlis MP said that Labour's failure to commit to ending the cruel scheme would prove they have no interest in representing Scotland's values. Commenting, Alison Thewlis MP said, "The Tory Rwanda scheme is a cruel and costly policy and one a Labour government must ditch to relieve the burden on taxpayers and show he takes the UK's humanitarian obligations seriously. It is tantamount to state-sponsored people trafficking." He went on to say taxpayers shouldn't be made to foot the bill for a policy that won't work, causes unnecessary suffering and does nothing to make their lives better. She carried on, Sir Keir Starmer must commit a Labour government to scrapping the policy indefinitely. If he does not, he is making it clear that he doesn't stand up for Scotland, our values and our household budgets. And it won't be the first time the Labour leader has signed up to keeping Tory policy, having told us repeatedly they'll retain austerity measures like the two-child cap and rape clause and remain committed to Brexit. Starmer has made it clear that there will be no real difference to the status quo under his incoming Labour government. She went on to say that the Rwanda scheme is proof Scotland's values and needs throughout a cost of living crisis aren't being represented by either Starmer or Sunak, showing why Scotland needs a strong team of SNP MPs. That can only happen by voting SNP at the next election. Richard, again, just my evergreen question to you. Alison Thewlis is a colleague of yours, and you'll have been in the room when these debates have been taking place about Rwanda, including today, I think, at PMQs with Jonathan Gullis's incredible contribution. What can you tell us that maybe we wouldn't glean from the press?
Probably very little, Brian. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but look, it's very, very clear that the Tories are desperate to get the Rwanda policy off the ground. I mean, Sunak never used to believe that it was a credible policy when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, but he's now shackled to it, beholden to that policy, because he's so agitated a section of the electorate in England, at any rate, and if we're being honest, possibly a small section in Scotland too, that this is the way to stop small boats. People have genuinely, who weren't aware of this and didn't particularly care about it, have come to believe that this is now the most important issue facing the UK, despite the fact that those coming across in boats are absolutely dwarfed in number by those who come here by other means. So they genuinely believe they've they want to claim the moral high ground in this, so therefore people traffickers are evil. Well, yes, nobody disagrees with that. But where they fall down is in thinking that Rwanda acts as any kind of deterrent, because most people will not, who are seeking to come to the UK shores in small boats across the English Channel, won't even be aware of this. And certainly the people that they're contacting to help them make that perilous journey aren't about to start advertising it. Nobody's going to say, well, before you give us your money, you should know that if you get caught on the other side once you're into England, that the UK government's planning to deport you to Rwanda. I somehow don't think that's part of the sales pitch for the people smugglers. So, but as ever, what needs to happen is you need to have a Home Office that's fit for purpose. You need to allow people to come here on a safe and legal route, and then deal with their applications quickly when they're here, and give people that not only do you have to stick by your international obligations there, but also you have to make sure that you are giving people an incentive to play by the rules. And sadly, for many years, the Home Office, the UK government's Home Office, has been such a basket case when it comes to processing immigration applications that nobody does that. And there are people who have been sitting for years waiting for decisions on their immigration status. So, when you've got people who are fleeing for their lives in some cases, it's hardly a surprise that people aren't going to necessarily follow the niceties of how the UK government would like them to, or says it would like them to arrive, especially when there are no, as I say, safe and legal routes. But I think that Sunak is about to be hoisted by his own petard on this issue, having made a section of the electorate so angry about this issue. He's desperate to get the flights going to Rwanda, and when he doesn't get them going, eventually that group of voters that he's so enraged about this and riled up are going to turn on him. And they'll do that in various ways. Maybe they'll stay at home and not vote. Maybe they'll vote for the loonies in the Reform Party, or potentially worse. But there's quite clearly, there is just nowhere that Rishi Sunak will not go in his bid to save his own skin politically. And if that means continuing to turn the gas up on the debate about immigration, that is what he will do. But if he fails to get this Rwanda scheme off the ground, then he will pay a very, very heavy political price. And the sad thing is that the polls show that most electors don't care about this particular issue. They don't care. Well, they care about the Rwanda policy in the sense that they think it's cruel and inhumane, but they don't think it's going to make any difference. And it is not influencing how they cast their votes, which will be decided on issues like the NHS and the cost of living, and in Scotland, the Constitution also.
Thanks, Richard. And time probably is against us now, but I am intrigued about, as you were in here. Yeah, okay. We better move on then. I've just been told that we really are running very late. So, but do check out Jonathan Gullis and his very deceptive contribution. He made it sound as if the Rwanda policy is off the ground when it isn't. Anyway, so the next item is households in England have been forced to pay more than £6 billion in prescription charges since the Scottish Government scrapped the charges in Scotland, House of Commons Library research has revealed. The data, commissioned by the SNP, shows that since 2011, when the Scottish Government abolished prescription charges, households in England have paid more than £6.6 billion in fees, while households in Scotland have paid £0. The analysis also found that since devolution in 1999, households in England have paid more than £11.7 billion in prescription fees. It comes just days before the UK government hiked prescription and prescription prepayment certificates by 2.59%, culminating in a 75.2% increase since 1999. Commenting, the SNP health spokesperson, Amy Callaghan MP, said, This latest analysis from the House of Commons Library highlights the important action being taken by a progressive, forward-thinking SNP Scottish Government. While households in England prepare to face another hike in prescription charges, households in Scotland can be safe with the knowledge that fees will remain abolished. This is a simple case of a tale of two governments. On one hand, you have a UK government who would rather take money out of people's pockets during a cost of living crisis, and on the other, you have an SNP Scottish government who would rather put money back into the pockets of struggling households. Forgive me, I'm not sure what happened there. Anyway, you still there, Richard?
I am, yes.
Hello. So that is essentially true about prescription charges, isn't it? I mean, we're in a cost of living crisis, and I saw somewhere that somebody worked out that it was only £9 a head if you take the population of England and divide it by that amount over those years. But the fact is, there will be some people that maybe only need a prescription every now and then, and it will only be £9 or so. But if you're ill and maybe disabled and you've got a family to bring up and you're struggling, you're going to maybe need repeat prescriptions in the middle of a cost of living crisis. And isn't it true that the Scottish Government scrapped it because they worked out that it was cheaper just to abolish prescription fees anyway?
Yes, that bit is true. Believe it or not, it actually costs more to administer the scheme than it brings in. Look, I mean, prescription charges. Thankfully, we've got rid of them in Scotland. They end up, reducing the cost of drugs for many people, but vastly inflating the costs of some drugs for other people in where in England where they still exist. I think it's deceptive to divide it by the population because as you say, not everybody will necessarily need a prescription. Some people will have to take them more, but I think the real thing that is always difficult to capture in this is the cost of failure, and by that I mean the cost of failing to treat medical issues amongst the population. Because while in England there are certain exemptions for people with chronic illnesses and repeat prescriptions, and particularly I think there's exemptions around for people getting cancer treatment. If somebody is prescribed maybe 3, 4, or 5 different courses of medicine, particularly if it's antibiotics, it's really important that you follow the course to the letter and complete it. And what was being found was that sometimes if people were being expected to pay that prescription charge several times over, they were picking and choosing what medicines they were actually taking out of those that had been prescribed, which was leading to all sorts of other ill effects and longer term ill health. So I think we could maybe all quibble about, whether or not people should get aspirin on a prescription charge if they've got a sore head. But I think, for more serious conditions, I think there's a very, very strong case that it is far cheaper in the long run and far better for society, but certainly far better for the individuals affected, just to give people the medication that they need and encourage them to take it as prescribed, because that way we reduce the cost of failure and having to treat people with more serious medical issues down the line. And that's the great benefit of scrapping prescription charges, is that it means that everybody contributes to the system through a progressive tax system and everybody takes out according to their need. That's a principle that the Labour Party used to have very little issue about, and you have to say that when they now try and criticise the SNP because of tax levels in Scotland, you have to wonder whether or not that's one of the things that they would take away in a performative effort to try and balance the books if they didn't have the same progressive tax policies on income as the Scottish National Party government did. But of course, as we know, you end up, if you've got a system that costs more to run than you bring in, you really do have to question what the point of that ever was.
And you just made me think, we don't really have time to discuss it, but you just made me realise, in a sense, something that you said. We've been hearing about people having to skip meals so that they can maybe pay for the heating. And it sounds like there might be some people that don't get their prescription so that they can afford something else, which, as you say, is not a very good prospect. But we'd best move on to the next item. Susan Hall, the Tory candidate for London Mayor, has joined a Facebook group which contains Islamophobic hate speech and abusive comments about her opponent, Sadiq Khan, the day after an expose about its contents. Khan is reported to have said that these revelations could have a direct impact on not just my safety, but the safety of my family and staff. A joint investigation by The Observer and Unearthed at the weekend profiled a network of Facebook groups focused on ultra-low emission zones that are operated by Conservative Party staff and activists, and which contained Islamophobic hate speech, conspiracy theories and abuse. Some of the groups included celebrations of vandalism and comments expressing disbelief that Khan had not been taken out. Hall was already a member of 6 of the group. On Monday, the day after the revelation, her official Facebook page joined a 7th group called Bexley Say No to ULEZ Expansion. The contents of the group include a YouTube video alleging that Islamists are taking over Britain, abuse towards Khan, including a post that read, "Seriously can't believe Khan hasn't been taken out yet. If dark forces can take out Princess Diana, I'm sure they can take out this money-grabbing little parasite." Examples of vandalism: one user shared a photo of an enforcement van with tyres slashed, noting 2 flat tyres and sprayed camera. Another user responded, "Well done to whoever that was." As we're against time, so the investigation identified 36 groups that appear to be separate grassroots movements opposing the expansion of ultra-low emission zones, or ULEZ schemes, to reduce air pollution. They do not say that they were set up by the Conservatives as part of a coordinated political campaign, but it has been found that they were set up by Conservative staff and activists. There is no suggestion the racist posts or those encouraging vandalism were made or engaged with by Conservative politicians and staff. Richard, this was brought up by Deirdre Brock today at FMQs, wasn't it? And she asked the Prime Minister directly about it. What kind of response did she get?
A dismissive and evasive one, as you would expect. He just tried to slither away from that. I mean, look, this is a growing scandal, and there's been a big astroturfing campaign against the 20 mile an hour zones in Wales, for example, that have been brought in by the Welsh government. There's been any number of misinformation that's been spouted by government ministers who've been talking about a blanket 20 mile an hour zone. UK government ministers, I hasten to add, when there's no such thing. I mean, it was the same rubbish that had Tories going on about 7 different bins and meat taxes, and your local council telling you what day you were apparently going to be able to go to the shop. And basically, they're so desperate for votes, they're tapping into the whole, Trumpian anti-vaxxer conspiracists to try and, agitate them and rile them up enough to go down and vote against things that aren't happening, in the hope that they'll put their cross next to the name of the Conservative candidate. And this is no different. But those Facebook groups about the 20 mile an hour limits in Wales, found out they were actually being run by Tory party activists and councillors in some cases from Yorkshire. So, there is quite clearly a significant online black ops set up that's being run on social media, designed to benefit the Conservative Party and with very close and intimate links to the Conservative Party. So I don't think Rishi Sunak is going to be able to distance himself from this. But I think the one consolation we can take is that Susan Hall is trailing Sadiq Khan badly. She has run what is possibly the worst election campaign that I have ever seen in 30 years in politics. She's made a series of utterly bizarre claims. I mean, she was claiming that she'd been mugged on the tube because she'd lost her purse. It turned out it had fallen out of her coat pocket and it was returned to her with all the money that was in it, an hour or so later. She has a 24-carat gold-plated, shadow-bottled, ocean-going idiot. And I think the people of London will be sending her packing when they go to the polls tomorrow. And hopefully that's the last we will ever see or hear of this individual ever again in a political sense. Because quite frankly, if that's the best that the Tory party can produce and offer the people of London, they're in serious trouble, and more trouble than any of us might have thought.
Thank you, Richard. And just before we do move on, so am I right in saying that the Prime Minister didn't denounce these Facebook groups when he answered?
Oh, did he? He just said, denied knowledge effectively, and he would make no apology for whatever straw man it was that he wasn't going to make an apology for. Holding people to account. That was how a democracy worked, apparently. Well, democracies rely on having people in them who seek leadership positions, who have integrity and honesty, and who are willing to commit to operating with at least that baseline of truth. And Rishi Sunak, it's just a game to him. He doesn't care about any of that. In many ways, he's an even bigger liar than Boris Johnson was. I mean, Boris Johnson at least knew he was lying. I'm no longer sure Rishi Sunak is able to tell the difference. It's just a noise that comes out of the hole in the front of his face to try and, which he hopes people will be appreciative of in sufficient numbers to vote for him to keep him where he is. I think that's a lost cause for him as well.
Okay, thank you, Richard. So the Scottish Parliament has voted to support a motion calling for the UK government to compensate the WASPI, that's Women Against State Pension Inequality. Women who were found by the Parliamentary Ombudsman to have been treated unfairly by UK governments when changes to the pension age were voted through. Commenting after today's Scottish Government debate in Holyrood, SNP MSP Kenneth Gibson said, Westminster parties have betrayed WASPI women, failing to apologise or come up with a scheme of compensation, despite numerous opportunities to do so. And it's shameful that both Labour and the Tories are now refusing to accept the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman's findings on the UK government's failures. The SNP, however, will not rest until every single WASPI woman receives the justice and full compensation that they deserve. Went on to say, as long as Scotland remains part of this dysfunctional Westminster system, the SNP will be a strong voice for WASPI women and Scotland's values. Richard, forgive me because I don't have your colleague's name, but you do have an MP, SNP MP and colleague who's been championing the WASPI women in Westminster. Patricia Gibson, I'm told. So again, I'm just going to ask you, as you've been in the room in Westminster and these charges against Westminster not providing compensation, is it true they had the opportunity but haven't done it?
Well, yeah, they could have done it at any time. Look, the Parliament, the Ombudsman has come back with a report and taken the unusual step of instead of reporting to government ministers, they've thrown it right back to the UK Parliament to say, look, we don't trust the government to do anything other than try and kick this into the long grass. So now it's basically down to MPs to try and find a way to take this forward. But I've been calling for months for the UK government, knowing that this was what was very likely to be the conclusion of the Ombudsman, that WASPI women had been misinformed or poorly informed and therefore hadn't had the opportunity to take some of the steps that would have been beneficial to allow them to prepare for a later retirement age, that compensation was inevitably going to be required and that they should start setting some of that aside, because there's women who have been forced to continue and work or to take low paid work and who have lost out significantly with that shift in the retirement age. Now, of course, the number of WASPI women, sadly, inevitably drops each year as people die. And I think that the fact that the Tory government isn't doing anything, the fact that you're hearing absolute silence from the Labour Party, that tells me that it's unlikely that we're going to get the right outcome. I think that eventually some money might be paid out, but they will drag this out as long as they can to minimise the number of WASPI women that they have to pay anything to. And even then, it will be pretty much the bare minimum. Maybe what the WASPI women need is somebody to make a drama like ITV made about Mr. Bates against the post office, because that seems to be about the only thing that shames governments and aspiring governments into any kind of action on this sort of issue.
Thank you, Richard. So the final item this evening is, according to media rumours, John Swinney and Kate Forbes have met to discuss a deal on the leadership of the SNP and who will become the next First Minister. An Ipsos poll has found that the majority of SNP members support John Swinney, while the wider Scottish electorate prefer Kate Forbes, although within that group are people who would never vote SNP. Some Scottish media commentators have been trying to frame the contest as between John Swinney as the continuity candidate versus Kate Forbes as the pro-business change candidate. However, this does not accurately reflect the debate in the party, which is looking for a new leader who will unite the SNP on a path to independence. John Swinney is being called on by many senior figures in the party to be the unity candidate, with several well-known MPs and MSPs having already endorsed Mr Swinney for SNP leader. Nominations close at midday on Monday the 6th of May, after which the timing of any contest will be decided. So, Richard, I promise I won't ask you about gossip, as it said, these are rumours, but I am intrigued. There's one name that wasn't mentioned there, which is, again, your colleague in Westminster, Stephen Flynn. Could you maybe explain why he couldn't become, maybe not that he couldn't become First Minister, but so I think the rules are, tell me if I'm wrong, if you're you can only become First Minister if you're an MSP in
That's
Holyrood.
correct. I mean, you can
But
become leader of the party if there's no requirement to be an MSP to be the leader of the party. There's no requirement to
yes,
be elected to anything to be. There's only a requirement that you're a member of the SNP in good standing. But I think there's an expectation has grown in the devolution era that the leader of the party will be an MSP, and therefore in contention to either become the First Minister or actually be the First Minister, and certainly when we're in government. Stephen, I think, is a very talented guy, but in terms of those, even if he was at in terms of those who are at the races for this, Stephen's not even at the right racetrack at the moment, being in Westminster rather than Holyrood. I hope to see Stephen in Holyrood someday. I think it would be good to see some of my Westminster colleagues, perhaps even myself, being in the Scottish Parliament one day. But, and obviously ultimately being completely out of Westminster altogether in the circumstances of Scotland being independent once more. But no, I think realistically, unless somebody decides to kind of run some kind of wildcard campaign for the purposes of seeking attention, it's going to be between the candidate or candidates will be from the MSP group.
thanks, Richard. And so, if it is worth, you might not have caught it yet, as you said, you were still catching up with it. But Patrick Harvey, the co-leader of Scottish Greens, when he made his contribution to the debate today, he kind of set out a timeline as to why it wouldn't be a good idea to bring down the Scottish government now. And he talked about future elections and changes and things. It's quite long drawn out and complicated. But so that's worth checking out. The nominations are open on Monday the 29th of April. That was the other day there at 11:59. Close of nominations is Monday the 6th of May at noon. The potential ballot is going to open on Monday the 13th of May at noon, and then it's going to close on Monday the 27th of May at noon. And I think I'm right in saying it's going to be SNP membership that's going to be voting on who that is. Again, as we don't know nobody's put in a nomination yet, but I was just intrigued again. What I was going to go on to say was, okay, so Stephen Flynn can't be First Minister because he's an MP rather than an MSP, but you said that he could be the leader of the party. Do you think there's a chance, or what would it be a good idea to split the role of so that you've got the First Minister in Edinburgh and the leader of the party in Westminster? Would that be a goer?
It's theoretically possible, but it's not something that I would find an attractive proposition, because you're going to inevitably find other parties trying to put a wedge between the leader and the First Minister. And I think it's important in terms of using the parliamentary strategy that the SNP has followed for decades now, in terms of using any parliament that we're eligible to stand for that's democratic, which is why we don't go to the House of Lords, incidentally. Using that as a platform and forming the government where we in the Scottish from the Scottish Parliament, that's the route we've taken. And I think it's important that the person that we have at the head of that government where we have it has the stature of also being the SNP's party leader. So no, I don't think that's something that would fly. I mean, I think there's always been scope for deputy leaders to kind of come into the sunlight a bit more and do a bit more G'ing up the party, doing more of that work. I think that would be an interesting space to see that being occupied. But in terms of leading the party and being First Minister, well, I think that when the SNP is in a position to do that, the two should be synonymous. And, even if we were in a situation where we didn't have the first ministership, pre 2007. Yes, with a party leader who wasn't in the Scottish Parliament, but that was only because we knew that Alex Salmond, as a party leader, newly returned then, was almost certainly going to be in the Scottish Parliament as the MSP for the Gordon constituency at the 2007 election. So I think unless there's a compelling reason that somebody's of sufficient standing is coming north, I think that the person who is leading for the SNP in the Scottish Parliament should also be ideally the leader of the party, even though we maybe don't want to ever write that down in case there's a situation where we want to, where it would be beneficial for everyone to change that.
Thank you, Richard. And I'm going to be cheeky and just steal 30 seconds of your time just to answer hopefully one question quickly. So, the fact that Douglas Ross can be an MSP in Edinburgh, he's also the leader of the Scottish Tories in Holyrood, and he's an MP in Westminster, as well as a linesman. So that's four jobs that I make at least. Is he allowed to wear all those hats simply because the Tory party rules allow that?
Yeah, basically, that's all there is to it. I mean, I think the decision that the SNP took about preventing dual mandates, I think that was a daft one, and said as much at the time. Now, it was there was much speculation about who that was supposed to be designed to stop, but I would just simply remind viewers respectfully that Neil Gray was an MP. He resigned his seat. He became an MSP. So he navigated that hurdle that was there quite successfully. And I think it would have been pretty bad form if there had been a mass exodus of people from Westminster who'd only just been elected there the year before to go up to Holyrood. But I think that in general terms, there should be a bit more flexibility. The parliamentary system isn't there for parliamentarians to game. It's not about their personal ambition, but there have been times in the not too distant past where it has been advantageous for the SNP to have people with dual mandates. I'm thinking about the MPs who came north, elected in 1997, who joined the Scottish Parliament in 1999, but also Alec when he was re-elected as party leader and was coming north with the intention of winning the 2007 election and becoming First Minister. Clearly, it was in nobody's interest to say you can't be an MP and you have to quit and then stand for Holyrood. So I don't think we should be allowing people to do it willy-nilly, but at the same time, I think having that rule written down is a bit daft, and it's something that we might want to look at in future.
Okay, thanks, Richard. I promise I will let you go. We're really out of time, but just quickly, are you willing to hazard a guess as to who you think might be the new First Minister, leader of the party, come Monday, the 27th of May?
Well, I'm not going to make a guess, but I will express a hope, and my personal view is I hope it's John Swinney. Look, I think we're incredibly blessed. Look, Kate Forbes is somebody who's very, very talented. I've got a lot of time for Kate, a lot of respect for her, just as I have for John. But I think at this moment in time, as far as I'm concerned, John Swinney is the standout candidate. But what a position of good fortune to be in after the rough ride we've had in recent months in the SNP, to be able to have two candidates for leadership of the party and First Minister, both of whom are more popular than any of the folk in leading other parties who might aspire to replace them.
Yes, thank you. And I'm sure that Mr. Swinney a few months ago, if you'd said that he would maybe be in this potential position, he would have said that it would be highly unlikely. So it just shows you politics. It's incredible. Richard, thank you for your time and your patience. But that is it for this evening. But before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our focus must now move to securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscriber base and regular funding. So thank you once again to my guest, Richard Thomson. Richard, thank you.
Great pleasure as always.
Thank you. And thank you to you at home for watching. Good night.